In addition to making a great outfeed table for the SawStop saw, I also wanted to have a glue up and assembly table that I could use. One of my other objectives was to use the SawStop as exclusively as possible on this project and really give it a workout, get used to it, and check it out and see how good a saw it really is. Unfortunately, the two pieces for the top were just too big to put on the SawStop without an outfeed table. I have a couple of outfeed rollers, but I just wasn't comfortable putting those big 49 by 97 inch sheets of MDF on top of the table saw right now with a couple of rickety roller stands behind it. So I cut the top pieces to size using the Festool TS55 and guide rail system. Now that those pieces are cut to size, I think we'll be using the SawStop pretty much for everything else through the project. Now what I'm doing right now is I started by leveling these pieces of MDF. I used shims under my work supports and got it level. I checked it at 3 locations this way and at 3 locations this way, and checked it diagonally both ways and tweaked it and tweaked it and tweaked it until I got it perfectly level. Now what I'm doing is I'm checking for flatness. And a good way to do that is with a heavy, true engineering grade steel rule. This is a heavy rule and it is dead flat. So the easiest way to do that is you can do it by sight, but you can also do it just by sliding it around. And you should feel equal resistance at all ends and in the middle on the rule. And if you feel an area where there's a little bit less resistance, then you can get down, get a bright light behind it, and check and see where you've got a high spot. And I happen to have a low spot right here, right in this section of this rule. So I have a piece of laminate, thin laminate material, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in right here. I've already put in a couple of other pieces in other places, and I'm going to put this in right here, and hopefully that'll be enough to bring this up. Okay, whoops, yeah, it's got lots of resistance. Let's see now if it looks better. Yep, that's right on. So you want to be very meticulous in this process. Take your time and get this thing perfectly dead flat, because building the torsion box depends on starting with an absolutely flat surface. Now it's time to start ripping up the grid pieces. Alright, now I'm getting set up to start cutting the strips for the grid work inside the torsion box. I'm going to be making the grid work out of 3/4 inch plywood. You could use MDF. I happen to like to use plywood. You want to make sure you start off with one good clean straight edge and then make your rip cuts, and make all your rip cuts at exactly the same time so that you're sure they're all exactly the same size. Now you can only see one in the picture, but I actually have 2 roller stands out here to catch the board as it comes off. And the main thing you want to do there is you want to make sure that the roller is just slightly below the level of the table saw, and the second one even a little bit lower than that. And you want to make sure that as the board clears the blade that it's still fully supported. Alright, so one thing I will mention in setting up this rip, the size is 2 1/4 inches for this torsion box. And I noticed that the fence, when you get it into position and lock it down, it moves a little bit. So you have to loosen it, tweak it back into place, lock it down, and it moves a little bit. I'm not sure if I can adjust that out, but right now it's a little bit of trial and error getting the fence into position. So, got it into place now, so let's get to cutting. Well, there are several ways to check the quality of the cut. First of all, you can feel of it and see how it feels. And I will say that this is the stock blade that came with the saw. And I think for this project it'll be okay. But I will be changing it out to a Forest Woodworker 2 blade that I just got back from having been cleaned and sharpened at the factory. And I know that blade will give me good results. There's a couple of things that you can check after you make a cut. First of all, you want to check the square and make sure that you've got good square cuts all the way around. But the other thing that I like to do, especially on a rip cut, a longer rip cut like this, is I like to check with calipers and just see how I'm doing from a thickness standpoint. Now I was shooting for 2 1/4, and I've got 2 17/64 there, and identically the same there, 2 17/64. So end to end, the consistency is quite good, which means merely that the fence is nice and straight and parallel to the blade. And the blade appears to be perfectly vertical. I did check that with a little digital gauge. So it's looking good. Now I just got a lot of ripping to do. Okay, to figure out the grid pattern for the torsion box, I came over here to my little wipe-off board and I drew a rectangle here representing the first piece of the top. This dimension here is 38 5/8 inches from here to here. And these, of course, are 3/4 inch pieces of plywood running this way. I sort of arbitrarily decided to put 5 in the middle, 1 on the outside here, 1 on the outside here, for a total of 7 strips. Now those 7 3/4 inch strips total up to a width of 5 1/4 inches. And then the entire thing being 38 5/8, that leaves 33 3/8 inches in these 6 spaces. So if I divide 6 into 33 3/8, I get 5 9/16. So for the spacers that go in here, I'm going to cut those 5 9/16. But what I'm going to do is I glue up, I'll start on one side and I'll work across to the other side, and then we'll take a final measurement here to make any adjustments that might be necessary because of variations in the thickness of the 3/4 inch plywood. Okay, all of the grid pieces have been ripped to width, and we're ready to start cutting those to length and assembling the grid inside the torsion box. But let me just review one more time the orientation here. We have a piece of 3/4 inch MDF here, which is actually going to be the top of the torsion box. Right now it's positioned on the bottom below the 1/2 inch piece. This 1/2 inch piece will actually be the bottom of the torsion box. We leveled everything up, got it perfectly flat, and then I set my combination square for 1 7/8 and moved this around until I got exactly 1 7/8, let's call it a reveal, on the 2 ends and on this side that's going next to the saw. Over here, we're exactly flush. The 2 edges of the MDF are exactly flush along this, which is going to be the front of the assembly. Now, I have drawn in the location of the pedestals for the base assembly. This is the 4x8 pedestal, and up here in this corner is the 4x4 pedestal, and they're drawn in at the other end as well. The positioning of that is 1 1/4 from the side of the 1/2 inch piece, 1 1/4 in, and 5/8 in here, 5/8 of an inch in here. The 4-inch pedestal is exactly flush with the front and the same 1 1/4 inch in from the side. After the 4 pedestal squares have been drawn in, I went corner to corner and drew an X to locate dead center of each of the pedestals. And the last thing we're going to do before we start gluing up the grid work on the inside is to drill a small locator hole through both pieces of MDF. Now that everything is in position, I'm going to drill a small, doesn't matter about the size, 1/8 inch, 3/16, whatever, a small hole through dead center of the 4 X's inside the 4 pedestal squares or rectangles drawn on this. Then we can start the grid work. And you'll understand why we're doing that here pretty shortly. And normally on a project like this, I would make all the cross cuts at my radial arm saw. But I want to do as much as I can using the SawStop saw. So I've knocked together a little cross cut sled here. I've checked it out, got it all squared up, and I'm starting to cut the pieces for the grid work inside the torsion box top.